I'm telling you, catfish and hush puppies and, just hard to beat, fried in cornmeal.
From the river to the valley to the sea. All the places, all the people that you can meet.
Welcome to the Mississippi Valley Traveler Podcast. I'm Dean Klinkenberg, and I've been exploring the deep history and rich culture of the people and places along America's greatest river, the Mississippi, since 2007. Join me as I go deep into the characters and places along the river and occasionally wander into other stories from the Midwest and other rivers. Read the episode show notes and get more information on the Mississippi at MississippiValleyTraveler.com. Let's get going. Welcome to episode 28 of the Mississippi Valley Traveler Podcast. In this episode, we're talking about food. I've been wanting to do one of these episodes for a while, and I'm hoping you'll have a lot more of these down the road. But today, we're going to begin the discussion of food along the Mississippi Valley with a nice discussion with Chef Regina Charboneau from Natchez, Mississippi. She's the author of Mississippi Current Cookbook, a culinary journey down America's greatest river. It's a collection of recipes, regional recipes, organized as complete menus. So you can follow an entire menu if you want, or you can choose a particular recipe that suits your fancy. We talk about what inspired her to put together a book like this, her background as a chef, and she does have a long and impressive resume as a chef in multiple places. She's also the culinary director now for the American Queen Steamboat Company. So we talk some about her work with the Steamboat Company and how her interest in regional foods is helping to reshape somewhat the menu that passengers get to enjoy on cruises. We'll talk a little bit about catfish. It's kind of one of the iconic foods of places along the river, so we have a nice discussion about catfish and its many ways to enjoy it. She's a big fan of cocktails, and Natchez, Mississippi is home or is well known for its cocktails, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And we just generally have fun with our conversation about how to enjoy food. In the Mississippi Minute, I'm going to continue the food theme. I had a conversation with a local restaurant owner, with Andy Fair from the Gelateria Coffee Company in St. Louis, and we talk about gelato and his interest in sourcing as much food locally as possible, so stick around for that. Well, thank you to everyone who has shown me some love through Patreon. If you want to join that community, it's at patreon.com/Dean Klinkenberg. That support helps keep this podcast going, and it's much, much appreciated. If you don't want to join the Patreon community, you can show me some love by buying me a coffee, and I do drink a substantial amount of coffee, so all the help there is appreciated. So now let's get on with the interview. Chef Regina Charboneau has been named Queen of Biscuits by the New York Times and other outlets. However, her knowledge of food goes way beyond biscuits. She's considered one of the premier Southern chefs in America. Regina is a Mississippi maven. Born and raised in Natchez, Mississippi, the river runs through her veins. She's worked as a camp cook in the bush of Alaska, created and owned restaurants in San Francisco, been chef de cuisine on a set of luxurious vintage railway cars, served as a culinary director of the American Queen Riverboat, and written 4 cookbooks, I think now, right? Everywhere she went, she brought Mississippi and Southern cooking with her. She returned to her native Natchez in 2001 and purchased the historic home Twin Oaks, where she took time off to raise her 2 sons. In 2014, she published Mississippi Current Cookbook, a culinary journey down America's greatest river. And that same year, she restored King's Tavern, and in 2019, she opened Regina's Kitchen, where she hosted biscuit classes, Southern cooking classes, and a popular restaurant and wine bar. She is now retired, kinda, sorta, which means working on her 5th cookbook, doing more culinary consulting and guest appearances and speaking engagements. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Anything Mississippi River, I'm all in. So I love what you're doing.
Well, tell me a little bit first about how your love for food and cooking sparked. Where did that begin for you?
Well, I grew up in Natchez, and my mother, I'm seventh generation Natchezian, and my mother is from a very long line of great hostesses, but terrible cooks. And but she married my father, who was from South Louisiana, who was raised by his dad died when he was young, and he was raised by his aunts, and they were all fabulous cooks. So he was the cook in our family. He loved food and was so good at it. So I grew up with a lot of Louisiana influence, and of course, being in Natchez, the fried chicken and biscuits and everything Southern here. So from an early age, food has been really a big part of my life. And big family. I'm one of 9 children. My mother was one of 9. So big holidays and spreads of food and, festivities, and just a big loving family, which I think what drew me to food and sharing food is just that sense of being together and all at a table. It's just, you can't beat that feeling. So it's kind of been my passion forever. I did go to several Southern universities and had a better time at each one, but the whole time I really wanted to cook.
Do you remember like one of the earliest times when you cooked a meal for other people? Like, what did you cook? What was that like?
Oh, yes, actually, I can. And I think some of my siblings will never forget. I had not cooked before, but we had a lady who worked for us who would cook a lot, several times a week. And then my father cooked a lot. And she was not, she would kind of go off the wagon. She had a bit of a drinking thing sometimes. And she was not showing up. And my father had been in a car accident, and my mother couldn't cook. So I was taking home economics at St. Mary's Cathedral. So my mother said, I will pay you what I pay Alberta if you want to try to do dinner. And so the first thing I did was bring home these horrible home ec recipes. And there was just immediately an uprising, like, we're not going to eat this. This is the worst thing, because we were accustomed to really good food. So then I just started cooking by feel, and I just had been around it so much. And so I threw away those recipes and started making gumbo and, crawfish etouffee I can make with my eyes closed. I mean, I just started doing the things that were familiar. And then my father had a collection of Time Life cookbooks, and I was always intrigued about world cuisine and would read those cover to cover. I made homemade wonton wrappers one time and did, authentic Chinese food in Natchez, Mississippi in the 60s. I just tried everything and enjoyed cooking. Bread making was a bit more of a challenge. I remember the first time I made bread, you could use it as a doorstop. My father actually made a joke of it and shellacked it and used it as a doorstop as a joke.
Oh my.
But yeah, but I'm a quick study. I got past that pretty quick.
We learn from our mistakes, right? Like if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying.
That's right.
So when did you get the idea to write a book about the food traditions along the Mississippi River? How did that idea come about?
Well, if you kind of go back and, I went to Alaska. I cooked out in the bush of Alaska and saved money and went to La Varenne in Paris. I had been cooking, and I, did some very targeted courses there. And then, I had restaurants in San Francisco. But when I came home, and I think just being away, you learn to, and not even learn, I guess you get all of these feelings of what you're missing, and you don't realize what you have until you're gone from it. So I always tease that I spent 23 years trying to get away from Natchez, and then I spent the next 25 trying to get home. And so when I moved back, I'd go walking in the mornings and I would go down to the river, and it's just been something about the river in Natchez and watching it. It's just so great. But I had connection to, when you mentioned the redone train cars, I did that for a gentleman named Christopher Kite, and he was a part of the group who was resurrecting the American Queen 12, 13 years ago. And they came to visit me and asked if I would consider helping them create the menus. And that was easy because they were basically doing New Orleans to Memphis. And I know that, that's my home turf and easy to do. So I did that. But then when I was actually traveling on the river and not by car to those places, it's just a totally different experience. And but then when we expanded and started going to the upper Mississippi, it was just so apparent to me how the river is basically divided into three distinct sections when it comes to food. And you have the upper Mississippi, and there's so much Eastern European influence. And I knew this because my husband, Doug, of 42 years now, is from Minneapolis. So, and we spent a lot of time in Minneapolis. So you have your Eastern European, your Polish, your German influence up there, pierogies and, cabbage, stuffed cabbage and walleye. And, but then, so I say, that's the upper Mississippi. Basically, Quad Cities to Minneapolis is upper, and then right below that, and I call it Twain Country, is so there to the confluence of the Arkansas River. And what happens is you go in the upper Mississippi, you have walleye and walnuts, and you get to that, right at that confluence, you get to catfish and pecans, and everything changes. And then from there, from Hannibal to there is, what I call Twain Country. And then you get to Memphis, and Memphis to the Bayou is, is really the cuisine that I was more familiar with. But they were so distinct. But even more interesting to me is, I love cultural influences in agriculture. And that was, the people who settled in all of these areas had such an impact on the cuisine. So that's what inspired me to write that book. And also what I did was to make more current applications to a lot of these recipes. And my twist, like instead of pierogi with potato and sour cream and, an all white dish, I did in my book, Mississippi Current, I did sweet potato bacon pierogi with sauteed beet greens. And so kind of added, just a new twist to a lot of these traditional recipes. So, I've had a busy 20 years at Twin Oaks, and when COVID hit and we just decided to not hang in there and to start selling things off and closing and retire, the American Queen reached out to me a couple of years ago to be their culinary ambassador and come on board and do some cooking demos. And when I was on board, I really felt more and more like these boats should really be doing what I did with my book. We really should, it should have a reflection and a sense of place. And the American Queen has a new president, Cindy Doust, and John Wagner retired, and he was so supportive of me always, and just I consider him a dear friend. And there were a couple of presidents in between, but Cindy came on and we met, and I made mention to her, and she goes, "That is absolutely my vision. Let's get this going." And we, from the time she said go, and I started in February and May of this year on all the boats, I implemented menus that if you're in Paducah, Kentucky, It has a German influence, and we get some bread that night for dinner from the German bakery there in Paducah, which has a great history. And and we have schnitzel and some other dishes, and then we have some more, it's not all that, but it's definitely influences. And on the top of each menu, I give a little brief history of why we're doing that menu and what the influence and the people that influenced. And, how many people really knew that the Sicilians came to New Orleans, not through Ellis Island, but years and years before, in the citrus trade. They literally brought citrus to Louisiana and to the islands from Sicily. And so there's a lot of Sicilian influence in New Orleans. And so for me, it was fun that how can I be on the Mississippi River and do things that are not just fried chicken and things that people think of river cuisine, but the cuisine of the people who settled along the river. So, and it's been, because for me, I love food, and to be able to create a menu and put lobster arancini on a menu and justify it, because these people, lived here. Lobster, not so much. In fact, it's been a battle. People have this thing about lobster on a cruise, and I just don't think we should be serving lobster on the Mississippi River or the Ohio River. We may have to do it once a night just because there may be an uprising, because there was a period with the American Queen that they offered it every night. And, so anyway, I just feel, and people are responding very well. And as I think I mentioned to you earlier, we just won a really prestigious award for going in this direction. So it's really fun.
Well, it's great. One of the things that I did really enjoy about your book is that you have you're inspired by traditional recipes, but you're not just repeating them. So you take these ingredients that might have a home up in Minnesota or Louisiana or wherever, and then you add a twist, or you change them into something slightly different. So it still respects the source, but then you're modernizing it and giving us something new. And I thought that was really great. I love wild rice. I'm a big fan of wild rice. And your cookbook has several new ideas for me on ways that I can use wild rice.
Yeah, I've got another one too. We have pretty much we have a vegan menu that when guests get on board the American Queen voyages, and if they're vegan, there's a menu that has every day a breakfast, lunch, and dinner vegan option. And I do, because of the Native American influence up and down the river, the Ohio River and the Mississippi River, the upper Mississippi specifically, I do a wild rice bowl with roasted sweet potatoes and greens, and what else is in there. It's a really wonderful dish. And I do a Native American onion sauce that's used in Native American cooking, where the onion is cooked down so much to a puree that it's very sweet, and you mix that with the wild rice. It's a wonderful dish. I'll have to send you the recipe.
That sounds delicious too. So everybody, I think a lot of people probably associate one food mostly with the Mississippi. So let's talk about that for just a second. And that's catfish. Like pretty much anywhere you go along the Mississippi, you'll find catfish. But there are lots of different ways to prepare it. So what are your thoughts on catfish? What do you like? How do you like to cook it?
And I think it's in Mississippi Current. I've got a recipe in there for catfish at breakfast you sear it with apple smoked bacon and with the fried egg on top. That's like real river cooking.
Uh-huh.
And, but one of my favorite dishes I've been doing for a long, long time, when I was in France, the family I spent time with, Arlette was from the south of France, and she was very much into coulis, like these really good fresh sauces made from fresh vegetables. And So I loved her tomato coulis. So I do a smoked tomato coulis and then catfish in a cornmeal crust with a black eyed pea vinaigrette. And that's a wonderful dish.
Mm.
What else do I do with catfish? That's the thing is, it's great on a poor boy, whether it's fried or sauteed. And, what's funny though, you do, even though there is catfish all along the Mississippi River, you don't see it on a menu till you hit the confluence of the Arkansas River and Memphis.
Right. And then, I had an experience I wasn't expecting when I ate in a little cafe in Arkansas a few years ago, where they asked a couple of questions about when I ordered catfish. They wanted to know, did I want farm raised or river caught? And then they wanted to know if I wanted steak or fillet.
Wow. I'm impressed by that. But
Yeah, so I haven't really encountered that very many times, but there are different ways to
no,
cut it. And I think probably farm
sure.
raised is the most common source for most restaurants, I would
Yeah,
guess.
now it is, and we, of course, try to really support the Mississippi catfish farmers because they've had a struggle. The interesting thing about the river caught, you don't see that very often. Actually, I'm just trying to think of. Oh, I know. I was in Louisville, and Maker's Mark has a chef, and his menu was blue catfish, one of the dishes for a dinner. When I saw the menu, I thought, well, that's interesting because I remember my father going down. There was a man, Steve Stevens, that had a barge down under the hill, and he lived on that, but he was basically lived off of commercial fishing on the river. And that's what people would go and get what they call blue cats or blue catfish.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really hear any of that anymore. Everything's farm raised, but that's interesting. But definitely the steaks, a lot of people don't like the bones, but it's more economical. The fillet, of course, is like anything, more expensive. So that's interesting. Yeah. And where in Arkansas?
Yeah. Pardon me?
Where in Arkansas?
I'd have to look it up, but it was
Yeah.
near the Arkansas River. I was with a group and we were on our way to put in at a boat ramp just below the last dam on the Arkansas River. But
Oh, okay.
yeah. It's interesting too. I think catfish is probably a little more flexible than we give it credit for.
People have it has a bad rap. I've dealt with it forever, but I sold it. It was on my menu at Regina's at the Regis, which was a very elegant restaurant in San Francisco. And when we do it with the smoked tomato coulis and the black eyed pea vinaigrette on the boat, it's a lot of people order it.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, a lot of people go, catfish, I don't know. But it is muddy tasting if, depending on where it comes from. So the farm raised definitely toned it down a bit.
Right. I tried a recipe a few years ago. I saw Alton Brown make a catfish ceviche.
Okay.
It was actually pretty good. I'd make it again, but I think that's probably one where you need to have a pretty high quality farm raised catfish.
It's got
to make that work.
Yeah, that's interesting I've done a lot with it. I've never thought about ceviche with it, so have to try that. I'm trying to think of any other, I'll be honest, it's so hard to beat a catfish fry. Every year for the Tamale Festival, when my friend Julia Reed was living, her parents hosted a fish fry the Friday night of the event. We would all come. We did this kind of this round table thing. She invited her friends that were chefs and writers, and it was always a great event. But I'm telling you, catfish and hush puppies and, just hard to beat. Fried in cornmeal. So
absolutely, the cornmeal I think is the key to me too. Like it's got to have cornmeal batter. But
I think so too. The flour doesn't cut it. Now my brother Peter, who has Biscuits and Blues in Natchez, he uses corn flour on his shrimp, and on occasion I'll be in, and one of the cooks will use the corn flour, and it's like, no, you can't do it. It's not quite the same. It's not bad, but it's not quite the same. You need that crunch.
Hey, Dean Klinkenberg here, interrupting myself. Just wanted to remind you that if you'd like to know more about the Mississippi River, check out my books. I write the Mississippi Valley Traveler guidebooks for people who want to get to know the river better. I also write the Frank Dodge Mystery Series set in places along the Mississippi. Read those books to find out how many different ways my protagonist Frank Dodge can get into trouble. My newest book, Mississippi River Mayhem, details some of the disasters and tragedies that happened along Old Man River. Find any of them wherever books are sold. So one thing I was wondering about too, as a native of Natchez, are there food traditions in Natchez that are, a little different from its neighbors in the South?
Mostly liquor traditions. It's a party town. Natchez is known for having great parties and great cocktails. But we do have, we call Natchez the Little Easy. We do have more of a New Orleans influence than a Delta influence, for sure. And I think a lot of that is so many of our ancestors here, like my great grandfather came from Mallorca, Spain, and he was married to, his wife, Melanie Adam, had French roots. She was first generation New Orleanian in New Orleans, but her father was from France. So they, as they had, of course, we have to be real about the history and slaves, they really trained them on French cooking. So like New Orleans, it's a little bit of a high cuisine, not always country. I mean, not that every table didn't have that Sunday fried chicken and tons of vegetables and rice and gravy, but there is definitely the influence, like the shrimp and grits in a cream sauce, and a lot of seafood dishes are popular here. But people entertain a lot in Natchez. So you see a little bit of everything, but you see trends, I'm trying to think of the cookbook from Jackson, Mississippi, the Junior League did every year. I think it's called Come On In. I always say every time a new Junior League cookbook came out, the menus changed at cocktail parties and it would be the trend. I'm happy to say that when Regina's Table at Twin Oaks came out, there were several, I would see lots of my recipes at cocktail parties and dinner parties. And then I did a book a few years ago, I guess it's been 3 or 4 years now, called Natchez Style. And they sell it at Stanton Hall in Longwood. It's a beautiful, beautiful book, but it's 26 of the tour homes in Natchez. And I created a menu for each home that reflected the house or the history of the house or the people that live in it. I know all the people. And every menu, every book I've ever done, it's just the way I love to cook. Every book it's menus, a complete menu with the recipes, because I feel like people don't know how to pair food and make things go together. And I feel like that's one of the things from cooking for so long that I do well. And I really enjoy that. Now the new book I'm working on may in the very back have menu suggestions with the recipes, but it's kind of my life and food. So I've divided the book into 6 chapters, which are 6 courses. And so each chapter will have 10 or 12 recipes for that course. But it's really kind of my life as I compare it to 6 courses, with soup being comforting, and amuse-bouche is kind of experimenting, put your toe in a little bit to see what the meal is going to be like. And side dishes, I went all over the place. Entrees to me is, family and just family and that comfort, family and friends. And I feel like until the American Queen Voyages started working me so hard, but I'm loving it. I was in the dessert phase. So I'm still headed towards the dessert phase of my life. But
That's a
and
good phase to be in.
yeah, so it's fun.
So the next time in Natchez, what drink should I be looking out for, or should I have?
Well, let's see. Well, you'll have to come have a drink on my porch. And uh, I do a really good, I have my cooking school on Franklin Street, and I've hung on to that, even though I'm busy with the boats and I don't get to do it every week. I do it. I do my brunch class every time I am in town because that's what I love and what I'd like to continue to do until I'm not here anymore. And but anyway, I do a bourbon coffee punch that is
Mm.
really popular, really good. But I have actually, on the American Queen voyages, I have created and not even that I've created, because some of these cocktails are traditional, but I have a cocktail all along the river. Like on a voyage, we'll have a cocktail of the day that is offered, that is again a sense of place. Now I do the cocktail that we do on when we're in Natchez is the Natchez style Hemingway daiquiri. So it's a Hemingway daiquiri with a little twist and a little more booze in it, and that's the Natchez style.
Nice. So one of the things I'm curious about too, I'm lucky enough I get to travel around a lot. Obviously, most of that time is along the Mississippi. Sometimes I get a little discouraged because you go visit places and there's you can see the homogenization in food culture. Are you concerned at all that we're going to lose regional food traditions, or
Yeah.
what can we all do to work harder to find those local food traditions that still exist?
Um, support these little restaurants that are doing home cooking or regional cooking. And I just we just did a thing. It's kind of interesting. And you say, I'm the queen of biscuits. Well, I get a call that IHOP is now putting biscuits on their menu. And Natchez, I don't know if you know this, is the biscuit capital of the world. I claimed that like 20 years ago, and we started a biscuit festival because I just, for years since I've been home in Natchez, I work really hard to get more people here. And it's really changed a lot. And I mean, our food festival this year had 700 people attend. When we light our Christmas tree right after Thanksgiving, we have 600 or 700 people. We have thousands of people for the balloon race. I mean, so Natchez really does, brings people in. But so anyway, IHOP, because of the biscuit capital, they wanted to do, so they made Natchez IHOP USA for the day. And I'm going, I don't know if I want to be connected to IHOP, but then again, I thought, why not? And what they're doing, and I'm telling you, they did a really good job with their biscuits. They've developed, and it's nice that they're putting a Southern twist on their menu, and they're very into it. If in all their press releases and everything they did, they talked about how American, how Southern the biscuit is, and that they needed it on their menus. And so that's good. And maybe we will see a trend with chain restaurants trying to fit into their communities more. I mean, that's maybe wishful thinking on my part, because I know they have to do a lot of cookie cutter things, but it's such a competitive world, the world of food. Plus, so many people cook so well at home. I mean, you can get on Instagram and come up with 7 new ideas for dinner that take 5 minutes to do, or interesting little hacks in the kitchen. So I think they're going to, these more homogenized brands are going to have to up their game to stay competitive. And I tell you what I worry about most is just for people, and I think about families, and I'm so glad, my boys are grown, but oh my God, the cost of food is really just crazy right now. And I worry about that for families. And so I do think people cook at home for a lot of reasons, but I think it's with COVID, it became a passion
Right.
with people. And I know I book, if I post a cooking class, it gets booked right away. So
I have to ask, since I have the Queen of Biscuits here, like if you had like just one or two quick tips to offer on what anybody can do to make a better biscuit, what would you suggest?
okay, go to reginaskitchen.com. That's my website. And there's a video when I was on the Hallmark Channel. And I think I've got another link to a video when I was on NBC. But the key to my biscuits is I use a tea towel so I don't make a mess. Your hands don't touch the dough. The key to making biscuits is the two mistakes people make. They overmix them and they don't roll and fold the dough to create layers, and they roll them out too thin. Those are some common mistakes.
All right.
So if you see my tea towel technique, it'll help your biscuit making, and make up your cleanup will be easier. So
I'm in favor of all of those. So
yeah. So, but yeah, and biscuits are, they're popular, gosh, in so many restaurants, fine dining restaurants. I mean, every chef from Charleston to New York, I mean, everybody's doing. I have a funny story. I was in Miami, and one of my favorite chefs, Tristan Epps, young chef, was the chef there for Marcus Samuelson. And I came to visit, and that night they had the food, unbelievable food at the Red Rooster Overtown in Miami, just unbelievable. He's such a good chef, as is Marcus, and just this great dining experience. But they had a biscuit special, and he had told the servers, do not, whatever you do not take my biscuit to her table. Do not. And he teases me about that all the time, because I'm never serving you one of my biscuits. So it's just something I've been lucky with, that I just have down. And like I said, and thank you for saying I do more than biscuits, because it seems like, you do get labeled.
So this is kind of a little different take on the whole regional food thing too. I used to joke at times that if somebody from Minnesota married somebody from Louisiana, would there really be room for like lutefisk etouffee?
Right.
Probably that's never going to happen. But do you see like more mixing and merging of like regional traditions?
Well, yeah, I married somebody from Minneapolis, and the first Thanksgiving I spent with his family, everything on the plate was white, and it just freaked me out. But that's where, like, he loves pierogi, and my compromise to make pierogi was to put sweet potato and bacon in them. And I think the first time I made pierogi for him, I put andouille sausage in the potatoes. And he liked it, he liked it better. So, I mean, 42 years, he's still liking my twist on things. But I mean, I think ingredients are everywhere, now. I'll tell you, my biggest thing and my next phase with American Queen Voyages is to start getting more and more of the ingredients on board, and prearrange with farmers markets. And, that when we're in, let's say, Cape Girardeau or wherever, we can get tomatoes brought to the boat, and from the farmers market, and just a few things. But what we're doing, this is kind of a neat thing. This was Cindy, our president, Cindy Doust, came up with, but and then with Shore Excursions, we all implemented it. But when we're in Natchez, we get the Natchez the Natchez donut shop. We buy donuts for all the guests and the crew. And this is what I love about being connected to the riverboats and what it means to all these small towns along the river. The American Queen and the American Countess are both in Natchez probably around 30 times a year, each boat. one on Thursday, one on Friday, and sometimes different times. So if you think about buying $200, $250 worth of donuts, what that means to a small business. So we are very committed, and this is why I love this company. We're not just committed, we love our guests and we want to service them, but we are very committed to our partners on, our ports. And the riverboats are a huge economic impact along the river to these towns that don't have industry, don't have a lot. And so what, and you think about, they get water, they have garbage removed, they have, the crew goes to the Walmart, they go to the guests go to the restaurants and the shops. And then, so, we buy from Kirchhoff's Bakery in Paducah, we buy the bread, the German bread. And Vicksburg, we buy cinnamon rolls from a bakery. So, and that's what I will continue to develop, those relationships as well. Now, as vendors, we're like any big business, you rely on your food purveyors that can, we feed a lot of people, so we get big orders. But to really get out there and find these people along the river that have products. On a different river, we were on the Columbia River, and I went to a farmer's market, and there was a lady there who had the most beautiful flowers that she grew, cut flowers. And so to be able to buy those and arrange those on the boat instead of having roses that were grown in Ecuador or whatever, that's an impact, not just for that business, but for our guests to go, these are locally grown flowers. These are, and when you talk about the Sazerac, when I was in the Pacific Northwest, this was fun. On the Columbia River, I can't get so far away from my roots. So when I was going to do a cocktail demo, I was going to do a Sazerac, but I got all the ingredients locally. So there was Portland, Oregon, the bitters. I didn't get, Peychaud bitters. I got orange bitters from the Bitter Housewife, the cutest company. And then I got local rye whiskey from a local distiller. And then in Astoria, there's a distillery right downtown that makes absinthe. So I was able to make a Empress version of the Sazerac, but using all local ingredients, which was a lot of fun. Wow. But then, they have the wonderful, up there, they have the butterfly pea flowers, and they have gin, I don't know if you've seen Empress gin or whatever, and it's this vibrant blue. And when you put lemon in this gin, the reaction with the flower, it turns it purple. So instead of doing like a French 75, we did the lemon syrup, but we used that gin. And when you poured in the lemon syrup, it became purple. So we did a little tribute to Prince. So Purple Rain.
Nice.
But, it's just fun to get out and find these local ingredients and figure out ways to use them.
And you're right. I mean, that can have a powerful impact for, a company like the American Queen that's buying for a lot of people to source as much as they can from local communities. That's a great thing. I'm really happy to hear that. So I'm mindful of the time. I think we're just about out of time here. And so I just want to ask, if people want to keep up with your work and what's going on with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, my Instagram is Chef Regina. And my website, which I try to post recipes. I've been kind of bad. Had a busy year, but it's reginaskitchen.com. And then really, if you ever want to travel the Mississippi River, come see me. It's AQ Voyages, American Queen Voyages. And I'm very proud of to be affiliated with the company. It's been just an amazing experience, and I look forward to continuing to refine our product and welcome guests. And so maybe you need to come on a trip with me.
I would love that.
Yeah.
And
talk
it's
about
been a
what you
while.
do. Yeah.
I would love that. Yes. Well,
That'd be great.
thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. There was something else I was going to say. I forgot. Oh, I'll post links in the show notes to all your resources so people can follow that. And yeah, have a beautiful day. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Okay. All right. See you on the Mississippi.
And now it's time for the Mississippi Minute. As I mentioned at the top of the show, in this episode, we're going to do something a little different, and it's going to be more like the Mississippi 15 Minutes. I love the collection of small businesses along the Great River Road and the communities along the river, and it's what have been my goals all along to do brief profiles of as many of these as I can. So we're going to kick it off with a conversation I had with Andy Fair, who is the owner of the Gelateria Coffee Company in St. Louis. So we're going to talk about gelato and what makes it different from ice cream, and we'll also talk a little bit about how his approach to sourcing as much locally as he possible and using seasonal ingredients. Well, I'm here in the Gelateria Coffee Company in St. Louis with Andy Fair. Andy, thanks for talking with me this morning.
You're welcome, Dean. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're talking about gelato today. It's a pleasure to be here in your own place, of course, right? Yes. I wanted to pick your brain on gelato, as you know.
Sure.
So Gelateria, it's kind of in your name. What is the difference between gelato and ice cream? Let's start there.
Okay, well, there's essentially three differences. The first being that gelato has overall less fat content in the mix. The second being that traditionally, especially there are regional differences for gelato, but generally speaking, when we talk about gelato, we're talking about gelato that originated from Sicily or the south of Italy, and there's no egg in that gelato. And the third prominent difference would be what's called overrun, and that's the amount of air that is incorporated into the gelato as you're churning it.
So would it have a less airy texture
Correct.
than ice cream then? So
Yes, it's a thicker. That's why it's so much. It tastes really creamy, even though there's not a lot of fat in it, because there's less air whipped into it.
So is that how the cheaper ice cream brands get by with making their ice cream less expensive? Is they just whip more air into it?
That is correct.
Yeah.
The really cheap brands have a high percentage of overrun.
So how is it that it has less fat then? So ice cream, I guess, essentially is made with real cream.
Correct. It's not really 100% cream. A lot of times what we eat is more akin to ice milk, especially with, you talk about how much sugar is incorporated, and sugar has two purposes. It lowers the overall, the sensation of ice crystals, as well as sweetening. And you can use other sugars for example, we use dextrose here, and dextrose is really good at preventing ice crystals, but not very good at sweetening. So when I have a flavor, as we're inventing flavors, that it gets a little too sweet, I can cut down the sugar and bump up the dextrose, and that will keep the consistency the same overall, but make it less sweet on the palate.
All right. Interesting. I had no idea there were so many variables. I just thought you'd take a dairy product and you whip it up with some kind of flavor element and freeze it, and there you go. You got gelato.
Yeah. So gelato, what we do here is about, sorry, I have to do a little math in my head. It's 5% cream to whole milk, generally when we're talking about dairy flavors. The non-dairy milks that we use, oat milk, for example, we kind of cheat in a way because we use barista dairy milk, and barista dairy milk has oil mixed into it, emulsified into it, in order to help recreate that milk sensation. Fat on the tongue, fat is flavor, it's also texture.
Mm-hmm. So that's how you make the gelatos vegan friendly or non-dairy friendly, is primarily with the barista oat milk.
Correct. We have one flavor that we use with coconut milk.
Oh.
And then we have a whole line of sorbettos too, which would be milk-free.
All right. So tell me what's how do you make a sorbetto then? How is that different from gelato?
It's essentially you're just replacing the liquid content with water.
So it's frozen fruit or whatever you're using to flavor it. What are some of the more unusual flavors you've been able to put together for your gelatos here? I know if you look at the case, there are some standard flavors, usually a strawberry or chocolate, but then there are some interesting variations.
Yeah, we've done, so my two favorite most recent flavors that we've done were seasonal produce flavors. We did corn towards the middle of the summer. That was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. That was our first time doing corn, and I'd wanted to do it for a long time. And then we also were able to get some local pawpaws, and using that in the gelato has been a lot of fun. Being able to use the local ingredients as part of the repertoire, if you will, is a lot of fun.
Yeah. I had a chance to get a pint of the pawpaw gelato, and it was delicious.
Thanks.
Not real sweet, not overly sweet, but very flavorful.
Right. I had toyed around with putting a little more pawpaw in there or less, but we have a little bit still, and actually I don't know if I can get any more at this point. There's a guy that I know over on off of River de Pear, who has a yard farm, and he supplies me with different fruits and vegetables throughout the year. Not a lot, just occasionally. He has 2 pawpaw trees. One's a Susquehanna, and the other is, I can't remember the varietal.
If you did a blind taste testing, could you tell the difference between them, you suppose? Or?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I could tell you the difference if I could touch it, because the Susquehanna is so much bigger than the other varieties. But he also does, we should be getting some figs from him soon. And we're using his fennel this year, which I was talking about earlier.
Right.
So
I know you do as much as you can to source from local producers. It's not always possible for everything to do that.
Yeah.
But you are working in more and more local produce and products as much as you can.
Yes. I try to buy local, or at least from local suppliers, purveyors, as much as possible. We're really fortunate to have, this is kind of like a shameless plug for my friend, but there's a company here in St. Louis called Eat Here St. Louis, and my friend Preston bought that it was started by a guy named Andy Ayers, who used to own Riddle's Penultimate, if you remember, on Del Mar.
Sure.
And Andy sold the restaurant to his kids. That's hearsay. I think that's what happened. And then got out and started sourcing from local farmers, because Andy was always a very big proponent of using local as much as possible. He was one of the first people to ever have Ozark Forest mushrooms on his menu, like a regular staple, like it had its own place. And what a great guy.
Yeah.
And so what Andy started doing was compiling produce and other food goods from local farmers and then putting them in a central location and delivering them to restaurateurs. It's really difficult to try to manage, a Rolodex, if you will, of a bunch of local farmers to get, your onions from here and your eggs from here and, your pawpaws from here. And that company kind of changed that for local restaurateurs a little bit. There's a price point increase, just because they have to do the legwork. You're paying the middleman, but I personally find great value in that. And so anyway, Preston bought Eat Here St. Louis, and that allows us access now to a still.
Right. Well, because as a small business, it would be nearly impossible to have 150 different suppliers.
Exactly.
You can't manage it at that level. Right.
Exactly. And you have, Preston deals with people who I could deal just like this. I mean, Buttonwood Farms, for example. I can order Buttonwood eggs from Buttonwood, but I have a hard time meeting his minimum. Whereas with Preston, I can meet his minimum a lot easier because we're already getting the eggs, and then I can add other fun stuff onto it that I might not have been able to get otherwise.
Interesting. Well, let's go back to the gelato for just a second. I didn't realize until fairly recently that gelato has a shelf life.
It does.
So how long is it fresh and creamy and delicious, and how do you know when it's starting to lose its peak flavor?
Well, it depends on what temperature you store it at. So when I mentioned earlier the lower quantity of overall cream and no egg yolk, for example, which again cuts back on the overall fat content, but it also, you lose some of the emulsifying properties from eggs, and less overrun. What you end up with is a product that you have to serve at a warmer temperature than ice cream. So gelato is typically served anywhere from 8 degrees Fahrenheit to 13 degrees Fahrenheit, whereas ice cream you can pull directly out of your deep freezer and scoop it and put it in a bowl and pretty much eat it. So the one good thing about that, though, is that gelato you can put in a deep freeze and it will last a little bit longer. It's a tricky question where I'm getting at. It depends on what temperature it's stored. The other thing about gelato is people generally see it and it's displayed in a case and it's open air, which allows for oxidation, and that is decreasing overall shelf life. So we really try to burn through it, sell it in about 4 days or less.
Right. So when it starts to lose, when it's past its peak, as I understand it, you start to notice more of the ice crystals in it, and
the ice crystals you get from temperature variation. So inconsistencies in your temperature. So a freeze, a thaw, which we really do our best here to mitigate. My gelato display cases are over 25 years old. The equipment that we're using here we're doing the best that we can with what we have. You would notice it a lot more in your home freezer unless you have a very excellent home freezer.
All right. Well, I bring it up because, and I won't name the place, but I went to a place that served gelato a few months back, and I was surprised at the texture of it, that it had that kind of icy, you could taste the ice crystals in it, and it was not nearly as pleasing as the creamy texture you normally get in gelato. So gelato can sort of, it does have a shelf life. There are nuances in what that's like, but it can lose its creaminess and get past its peak enjoyability.
Correct.
Yeah.
It will, sometimes it will destabilize itself just based, excuse me. It will fall out of emulsification on certain flavors. You get a little separation, but really temperature control is the biggest thing, and minimizing the oxidation.
Right.
I learned a good technique recently about cleaning up the pans and maintaining the display, and kind of, instead of letting it all spread out, you kind of compress it together on one side of the pan to minimize exposure, which I don't know why I never thought of before. I guess I thought ice cream was just set it and forget it, but it's not.
There are always tricks to learn, aren't there?
Yeah, there's so much to learn.
Yeah. So speaking of learning then, so there's a lot more to the gelateria than just gelato.
Yeah.
So if somebody stops by here, what else can they expect?
Well, we have a great, I like to think of the gelateria as a Italian bar in the traditional sense. So in the morning you get coffees, pastries, so we house roast coffee. We have a nice variety of espresso drinks here. We also do batch brew and pour overs. We have a great selection of teas who we get from local suppliers, such as Big Heart Tea Company, female-owned business, and Teatopia, black-owned business in St. Louis. And both of those people have excellent teas. Reginald at Teatopia is a whiz. He's so passionate about tea. I love it. So we also do breakfast sandwiches in the morning that we make on our house-made brioche, and a array of baked goods. We do everything in-house that we're able to, and we try to really limit. I want to do croissants, but at this point in time, we don't have the capabilities to do laminated dough. I want to get you your Queen Amman.
I would love that.
I still remember. Every once in a while, I think about how we could do it, but we are limited by our preparation space at this point. So we I doubled down on brioche because we're able to do brioche. We do it really, really well, and so you see it in a lot of our baked goods.
Right, and you do focaccia really well too. So after the breakfast menu, you've got amazing sandwiches for lunch on focaccia breads and soups and salads.
We did a grilled cheese and soup last fall and through the winter. That was a lot of fun. Try to keep some vegetarian, vegan options for people. I'm a big fan of a grain salad, so I like having that as a menu option. We are, again, kind of limited on space, so we're doing the best we can with what we have.
Right.
But you would see that in a traditional Italian bar. And we have applied for our liquor license. Well, we are in the process of applying for our liquor license and hope to add beer and wine in the future. That will be draft only, so we're not going to do bottle service or cans of beer or anything like that. It will be just draft. You can get a carafe of the house red or white.
So do you have an idea about which wine will pair best with specific types of gelato?
Yeah.
You've been thinking about that?
We have even the option to do boozy gelato as well, which could be fun. I know Clementine's in town does a really good job with boozy ice cream, and I don't think we would try to make it our niche, but we could have a couple of flavors.
It's a big pie.
The one thing I'm really excited for is Caffè Corretto, which is a shot of espresso with a grappa or an amaro or something like that on the side, which would be coffee corrected.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, thanks so much for talking to me this morning, Andy. Appreciate it. Any other last minute plugs or anything else you want to mention about the gelateria?
This is just our regular neighborhood place.
We open every day. You open at 8 o'clock?
8 o'clock every morning. Open until at least 8 at night. And when we get alcohol, that could change. I don't foresee us staying open later than 10, but we really just want to be a staple of the community, the third space, so to speak.
Right. It is for me already. So thanks for talking to me this morning. I really appreciate it, Andy.
All right. Glad to be here, Dean.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the series on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss out on future episodes. I offer the podcast for free, but when you support the show with a few bucks through Patreon, you help keep the program going. Just go to patreon.com/Dean Klinkenberg. If you want to know more about the Mississippi River, check out my books. I write the Mississippi Valley Traveler guidebooks for people who want to get to know the Mississippi better. I also write the Frank Dodge Mystery Series that's set in places along the river. Find them wherever books are sold. The Mississippi Valley Traveler podcast is written and produced by me, Dean Klinkenberg. Original music by No Offense. See you next time.